Good evening, everyone. I sent you a text, the topic. You should know what the topic is. The topic is called creation. I forgot the topic. A world of chaos. A world of chaos. Seemingly, Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo the Almighty, blessed be His name. He's the creator, is perfect. Everything about the creator is perfect. And He creates these two perfect beings, Adam and Hava. And from that moment onwards, seemingly it's downhill. It's downhill. We know, seemingly. Seemingly, we'll soon see. That's what the shur is about. What's interesting is that really certainly the Parasha Bereshit, Nachmanides and many commentaries say the whole parasha is shrouded in absolute mystery. Without studying Kabbalah, it becomes very difficult to unravel the mysteries and the secrets of creation, of the purpose of creation, and of what's going on. We find Adam, which is Yetzir Kapav Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adam and Hava were created, the handiwork of God Himself, which were perfect beings. Beings that were perfect in every aspect. Their recognition of their divine sensitivities were not like ours, which we'll speak about in a minute. And then all of a sudden, they err, they stumble, they fall. And even though the whole concept of Bereshit, Parashat Bereshit, is very mysterious and mystical, but the Torah does tell us. The whole concept of Adam and Hava sinning, just to give you a brief, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I want to concentrate on other things, but just to give you a little bit of a brief insight into the concept or the motivation behind Adam. You have to understand that when man was created, he looked at negativity or impulse or bad or desires or pleasures at a distance. He was detached from them because he was perfect. As the Zohar HaKadosh says, that their eyes prior to the sin were open to the heavens. It's like the Gemara says about Shmuel, Nehilin lei shevilin derakia keshvilin da naharda. The highways and byways, the alleys, so to speak, the smallest alleys of heaven, in other words, what's going on in heaven, are clear to him like the alleys of the city where he lived in Babylon in those days. In other words, what's going on in heaven was clear to him. If that was clear of the sages, how much more so was this clear of Adam HaRishon, of man that was created by God Himself, who didn't come after subsequent generations, who were then born from human flesh. Of course, as the Gemara says, that there are three partners to creation, the male, the female, and God. But in regards to Adam and Hava, there weren't three partners, there was only one partner, God Himself. And therefore, if there's a capacity, if there is a potential and an ability for a human being to be intuitive, to know what's going on, to have the spiritual antennas, to see what's going on in heavens, to be in tune with what's going on in heavens, how much more so was this the case of Adam and Hava? However, we have to understand what propelled such a person, who the heavens were open to him and who looked at the world in a detached manner. What propelled him to sin? Surely it wasn't the temptation of sin itself. After all, what was the temptation here? To eat of the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and you will then know bad intimately? Who wants to know bad intimately? Which human being today, how many times have people told me, why did God create negativity? Why did God create this negative impulse? Wouldn't it be great if we had a world that everybody never had a negative impulse and was always propelled to do good? It'd be a beautiful world. In fact, there are many sources that explain to us that it's almost as if man was set up, like David HaMelech, but I'm not going to speak about that now. David HaMelech and the whole story of Bathsheba, it was a setup to bring the world to tshuva, which is an even higher rectification, which again is not the topic of conversation today, but we have to understand that the whole concept of man's error and sin wasn't one of how we err and we sin. God forbid if a person sees, a stack of cash and nobody's around and he doesn't know, he's got this moral dilemma, should he take it, shouldn't he take it, nobody's watching, the guy anyway said a bad word to me, he embarrassed me, and he's got all of these justifications why, and he made a pledge to the synagogue and he promised that he'll pay and he didn't pay, and he's a mamzer and he's a this and that, and I'll take the money and I'll give the donation to the synagogue and I'll give the donation to the blind, and all of the different type of justifications which we like to give ourselves for everything that we'd like to do. And he has a moral dilemma. Surely it wasn't on that level at all. What was the justification? What was the impetus behind man sinning? Was simply that if man can reach such high levels of spirituality and dvekut b'Kadosh Baruch Hu, and cleaving to God in such a natural way, simply because he has a spark of God within him, how much more so will this be when man toils to cleave to God, and that the impulse, the negativity that is now detached from me, it becomes an intimate impulse within me, and then I overcome the temptation, and then I do the will of God, is unbelievably powerful. As it says in the Zohar, it says in Kabbalistic writings, when a person suppresses the evil inclination, when a person suppresses his impulses, he causes an immense divine light, what's called the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, to be illuminated in this material physical world, which is an impossibility. A vessel that is limited cannot contain the unlimited. But when a person refines himself and the world to such an extent that negativity or bad or desires or pleasures are an intimate part of him, and he overcomes that, he so rectifies himself and so expands the vessel, the body, so to speak, again we're using Kabbalistic terminology, the vessel to such an extent that it is fitting, able and ready to receive a divine light that ordinarily could not shine in the vessels. Much higher than what can contained even in the Garden of Eden, as the Kabbalists teach. And that was his impetus, that was his motivation behind this whole concept. So just to give you a little bit of an insight to understand, we're not talking about just, they were frolicking in the Garden of Eden and they were bored. There was no internet, there was no mobile phones, there was no WhatsApp, there was no things that they could flick in. What are we going to do now? Well, we had our picnic. Or what are we going to do now? Well, we had to look at all the trees. We gave names to all of the animals. Well, what are we going to do now? I know. We haven't tasted from the tree of knowledge. We've had a mango. We've had a this. We've had a that. But we haven't had from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. Let's try it out. It's obviously that's not the case. So we understand that there's a lot of mystery behind all of this concept, and the Kabbalists speak a lot about this. But despite the fact that there are mysteries behind all of this, the Torah lists it. The Torah tells us, and when the Torah teaches us and writes something, there is lessons to be had, even though we cannot plumb the very depth of what's going on necessarily. Especially since after the sin, that our spiritual perception and understanding has been diminished. Furthermore, it's hard to understand Cain, which is, again, we're talking about the very moments of creation, the first and second generation kills his brother Hevel. It's just preposterous. I mean, very few normal human beings will stoop to such a level of killing another human being. It's just such a finality to it. And unfortunately, there are such people, but we don't consider them in our realm. We don't consider them normal. Anybody that can stoop to that, either the circumstances were such extreme that pushed them beyond the normal, or they themselves are not normal, or their circumstances were not normal, or they are not normal. But a normal human being, certainly under normal circumstances, would never even ponder and think about such a thing. I remember reading about an elderly couple that were asked what was their secret to the longevity of their marriage, the success of their marriage. Did you ever contemplate divorce during these 67 years of your marriage? They said, divorce, never. Murder, many times. But a normal human being doesn't contemplate murder. So these are all important questions. How is it possible? And then furthermore, we have the generation of Enosh, that were idol worshippers, that began to sow the seeds of idol worship. And as Maimonides explained to us, they weren't fools. But what they figured is, in their mind, and again, we're talking about such a small time span from creation, from the Creator himself. Yet, they philosophized about the Creator. He's too abstract. He's too far removed. If that's the case, then it defies logic, because why would a Creator create the world? Obviously, there's a purpose. And He desires for this purpose. But yet, and don't forget, after the sin, as we will soon see, there is something imperfect about the way we look at things. And perhaps the reason why we will soon see why, but one of the reasons why there's an imperfect way of looking at things, because we want to see things the way we want to see it. You want to explain it the way we want to explain it, because we want already to write the story. We want to write the punchline. We want the outcome to suit me. And when we want the outcome to suit me, so I write the story around it. I write the plot around it in order to facilitate the end. So because we are subjective in our view, subjective because Adam karov etzel atzmo, man is close to himself, and he seeks what he wants, so he seeks to justify it. So therefore it becomes, even though logic dictates that there is a creator and the creator of the world and it has a purpose and we're part of that plan and that purpose, all of a sudden you have people saying God is too abstract. Yes, of course God is abstract, but He created the world because He wants the world. How have we forgotten about that? God is unlimited. Of course God is unlimited, but He created this world and He desires for this world. And therefore they came up with the ideas that, well, if God gave influence and power to the constellations, to the sun and the moon, and they influence the world by giving life, by giving light, by affecting the winds, the tides, the growth, the vegetation, and life and everything about it, because without the sun there is no life, without the moon there is also no life. There is no growth. You cannot have growth in this world. The Gemara says in Masechet Ta'anit that if there's no winds, you cannot have proper produce. You need the winds. You need the rains. You need the winds. The winds come from the tides, are influenced from the tides, which are influenced from the moon. Rain comes from the sun, precipitation and all of that stuff. So there cannot be any life. So if God gave influences, immense influence to the sun and the moon and the constellations, then surely it behooves us to show them respect. And perhaps use them as a medium. For if God gave them respect, then we should also give them respect. But of course, they are simply a tool in the hand of the artisan. This tool, that tool, makes no difference which tool. It is the artisan that is the one that creates and gives purpose to that vessel, not the creation, not to the article, to the item, not the tool, the utensil. Thank you. They're all utensils. And man is the one that is in center stage. So they began to bow to the sun and the moon, and then eventually, as Maimonides explains, the second generation began to make images of the sun and the moon and the constellations as a reminder. Icons, people need icons, tangible, physical things. And then subsequent generations forgot about the sun and the moon that were created by God, which to them, in their original thought, is abstract, and began to worship the you know how tradition goes and custom goes, and you forget sometimes about the core values, and they began to worship the icons themselves that believed that they had power and influence, etc., etc. How is this possible? And then, of course, where the whole world became corrupted besides Noah, how was that possible? How did the world deteriorate in such a short span of time? So I rarely do this. I rarely read directly from a book. I may quote and read little parts, but this essay that was written by Netivot Shalom, one of my favorite, one of my favorite books. I think sometimes there's a beauty to reading. There's a certain poetry to reading directly from the text. And I gave the introduction, some of it my own, some of it his own, from here, based upon here. This is the introduction that he gave to this essay, and I would like to read, with your permission, and translate and take it from there. So then he says, how is it possible that we have come to a stage by which the whole world is corrupted, and of which it says, Ki nihamti ki asitim, I have regretted that I have created them, so to speak. Yet on the other hand, we find Vayar Elokim et kol asher asa v'hine tov me'od. When God finished creation, he says, and God looked upon all of creation, and he stated that he beheld that it was very good. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yodea et ha'atidot. God knows the future. V'galu v'yadua lefanav she'atid latzet dor ha'mabor shekulo ra ve'en bo shum chelek tov. God knows that there's going to come about a generation that is corrupt, people that will be corrupt, and in fact the whole generation that is corrupt, that threatens the very existence and the very foundation of creation, its purpose, to such a degree that the whole world had to be, so to speak, almost recreated from Noah. Because the corruption was so great that they could not have a kiyum, a continuity and an endurance, for the corruption was so great. It's like a plant that's so rotten, you can't use that seed anymore. Anything that you plant from that tree will be so corrupted and so rotten that subsequent fruits and seeds and subsequent fruits from those seeds and fruits, etc., will always all be bad. Something's wrong with it. It's a bad, I don't know what. Type, zan, min, whatever. If there is such a thing in horticulture or agriculture, I'm sure there is. But it's just not redeemable anymore. So on the one hand, we see that almost so to speak, God says, I have regretted. But the same God says, prior to that, when he finished creation, everything is exceedingly good. Surely God knows the power of evil and how corrupt that power is and how much it can corrupt the world. So he continues. So how is it possible that God says, God saw everything that he did and it was exceedingly good? Nachmanides, which was one of the classic commentaries of the Bible and one of the most distinguished and reliable Kabbalists. Marhu Rabbi Chaim Vital writes, and he lists who we can rely on as interpreters or the custodians of the Kabbalistic tradition that have passed it down, understood it, interpreted, and passed it down in the most correct fashion. Nachmanides is one of them. Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, as opposed to Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon Rambam. Mefaresh, he explains, the fact that God stood back and said, I see everything that I've done and it is exceedingly good. Pirush, the explanation, that God seeks the endurance and the continuity of the world. He seeks that the world will endure and will exist. And he gave it the potential to exist forever if man would not have sinned. For example, like our rabbis have taught in a Midrash, the Midrash tells us something that the Kabbalists explain to us at length. We don't have the time so much to explain here, but literally means that God created worlds and destroyed worlds. What does it mean, created worlds and destroyed worlds? It means to say that from absolute spirituality could not become absolute physicality. There had to be a process. Destroying basically means to say a descent of levels, the Kabbalists teach us. It means to say there was a level that was created, there was a descent. Every descent is in Kabbalistic terminology is called death or destruction. Because in relation to its previous level, it's considered like it's dying. Take a human being, for example. What happens when a person passes away? What do? We intern him. We bury them. In other words, it's a descent. So from being upright, they lay on the floor, and then we bury them in the ground. So there are levels of descent. In Kabbalistic terminology, that is called death or destruction, which means to say that there was a process. In other words, all of the highest levels, all of the higher levels higher than us, that didn't satisfy God. That wasn't the world that He wanted. Are you with me? It was this world that He wanted. The very world, the high worlds don't get corrupted. They're spiritual worlds, there's no negativity there. It is this world that can be corrupted, can become corrupted, and has a potential, and man has a potential to destroy. God sits back and He says, Vayad Elokim, v'hineh tov me'od. It's exceedingly good. Ramban explains, because this is a world that He wanted. He didn't satisfy Himself with the higher, loftier worlds that had lofty divine revelation and recognized its divine creator and its source and the divine light, and they were nullified before it. No, God wanted a world that we are not nullified before Him consciously. That we have to work on it and make that happen. That's the world that He wanted. This world, the very world that became so corrupt. And chaos and havoc reigned. So that's the world that God wanted, said Nachmanides. Until He created this world, and this is what He desired, and this is what He wanted. And this is the world where He says, tov me'od. God saw everything that tov me'od, and it's exceedingly good. He didn't say that about the higher worlds. And again, when we say high worlds, we're talking about heightened revelations of godliness, by which slowly was filtered and concealed, or called broken and descending, until it reached this world. Even pertaining to this, one has to ask that question and wonder. God knew that the world could become corrupted, like a generation of Noah that corrupted the whole world. To such a degree where God Himself stated, I regret. so to speak. So why did God design such a world where there's so much chaos and havoc and turning our back upon God? High level, just a little bit higher than us would be good. Just a drop higher than us. A little bit higher perception. If you knew you're sitting in your room, in your house, and you like playing computer games all day long, I don't know what you like to do, or I don't know what, or do embarrassing, silly things. I don't know what you like to throw, I don't know, Maltesers, or what do you call them, the little, you like to do that all day long and eat them, but you would never do it publicly because I'm a 32-year-old, I'm a CEO of a company. Can you imagine people see me going like this and sitting there and blowing cigars in those rings, those people who sit there, blow rings like for half an hour, and you'd be embarrassed to do it publicly. Some aren't embarrassed, but there are those still that are embarrassed. Can you imagine that there was a camera in your room? And the camera in your room is a live feed to all your employees or your employer, whichever embarrasses you more, to your family, your children, your wife, your kids. Would you behave in such a manner that you do embarrassing things? Absolutely not, because you're aware that people are watching you. The greater your awareness, the greater your embarrassment. The greater our awareness before God Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, the greater our shame and embarrassment to do things that are unbecoming. Therefore, just a world higher than us, of which their perception and awareness of godliness and God's presence is much more acute, be great. No generation of Mabul, of Noah, of the destruction. No people who carry on the way we carry on. Wars, divisions, destruction. One level higher. No. Despite that, that's the world that God wants. Achen, he writes, indeed, Yisod HaDevarim, the foundation of all of this, Hu kema'amad HaKatuv, like it says in Isaiah, in Yeshaya chapter 45, Yotzer Or Uvoreh Hosha, God is the former of light and the creator of darkness. Oseh Shalom, he makes peace. Uboreh Ra, and he's the creator of evil. Unlike other religions that think that evil has a separate Godhead or somehow a separate independence. Nothing is independent of God. God created light, created darkness. Created good, he created bad. Ani Hashem oseh kol ele, I am the Lord who created all of this. Hainu shakadosh baruch hu bara et hatov. God created the good. Kmo ken hu shebara gam et hara. Equally created bad. Ve'en shum koach acher zulato yitbarach. There is no other power. There's no other influence. There's no other creator. All aspects in this world come from God, are dependent upon God for every single second of its existence, including negativity. The only difference is negativity gets its life force from God in a very, very concealed manner. What the Kabbalist calls of hitzoniyot, from the external of 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 the spark of the spark of the spark of the spark of God, godly light. In other words, it is almost like exiled. This divine spark is exiled within that husk or that impurity, to the extent that it doesn't recognize its source at all. And there are times that when we lead our lives of desire and pleasure and lust, where we too fail to recognize the divine spark that enlivens us, and we become desensitized, as we will soon see a remarkable and important lesson, a very powerful and important lesson for us. Ukeneged koach hara, and corresponding to this influence and power of negativity, bara kadosh baruch hu koach hatov, God created the power of good. Leman Yigvor hatov al hara, in order that the good will always overpower and overcome and outshine the bad. Ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekor hatov, for the Almighty, which is the source of all good, v'darko lehetiv, and of which nature is to do good. The nature of good is to do good. A kind person seeks to bestow his goodness. A teacher seeks to teach. Tiken et haberiyah, he founded and established the world. She'atov yitgaber al hara, that naturally the good will overpower the bad. In other words, on the one hand, there is equilibrium and harmony. But on the other hand, inherently good can overpower the bad. As it says in Sefer Tanya Kadisha, that a person who was born b'teva toldoto, within his inherent nature, shemoach shalit al halev, that his brain, that his mind, that his thinking can control and subdue his heart, i.e. his passion. Desire is a very powerful thing. But we have it inherently that we can think a little bit and saying this is unbecoming, if we want to. In other words, the power is there. You have that power of control. That power of control is never ever taken away from you, no matter how great and strong the passion is. As long as the power of good and bad are equal, so to speak, all things being equal, this corresponding to that, we have the ability for good to overpower bad. And this is what it says, that God saw the world, it is exceedingly good, meaning to say that good will always have the power to overcome bad, inherently so. Despite the fact that we see a lot of bad, and as we will soon deal with it in a minute. For good has the power to overcome bad. Indeed, now listen to this. כל זהו שכוח הטוב אינו נבדל לעצמו והוא נפרד לעצמו. As long as good is separate and bad is separate. As long as there is a distinction, a clear demarcation between the two, there is an inherent ability to overcome. But what happens when they converge? What happens when good becomes confused with bad and bad becomes confused with good? What happens when we don't see so clearly, we aren't able to recognize the good or justify the bad and give it a good intention or reason behind it? They become converged. They overlap. Therein lies the biggest danger. And that is the biggest failing of humanity that came about through the sin of the tree of knowledge. Knowledge means when you become one, when you know. And man knew Hava. One of the expressions of intimacy in the Bible is, and man knew Eve. Knew Eve means he was intimate with her, means to say that you know her, means to say that you're fully focused and become one with her, like you know something. It's absolutely one with you. The tree of knowledge of good and bad means to say now that good and bad converge. Bipolar, you ever heard of what bipolar? What's bipolar? Someone who has two extremes, two opposites. Sometimes he's up, sometimes he's down. Sometimes he talks normal, sometimes he doesn't. Bipolar. We've become spiritually bipolar. After eating the tree of knowledge of good and bad, we became spiritually bipolar. Now listen to this. Which isn't so. When there is a confusion, when there's a mixture of good and bad, when they converge, and within the good is mixed a little bit of bad, מאבד הטוב את כוחו להתגבר על הרע, it becomes very difficult to draw from that inner strength that we have within us of good overcoming and overpowering bad, because now we become subjective, no longer objective. Before man ate from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, he was objective. Now he became subjective. Hang on, what do I get out of this? Does it serve my interest? Is it really what I want? I really want to do this. Yeah, but it's bad. You can justify it this way because it's not so bad. Yeah, surely God doesn't mind. And all of these different justifications that we have for whatever it is that we want to do. I'm not that bad. I don't kill. Thanks, Sam. I don't kill. I don't steal. Now people say, I don't kill, I don't steal, I'm a good person. Yeah, of course, you're a good person. You don't kill, you don't steal. But the intention of God is that we transcend self. We transcend the limitation of this world and our passions and our justifications to do what we want to do. Because that is the mentality of the sin of tree of knowledge of good and bad. We have to try and re-enter the Garden of Eden to transcend that blemish that was given to us and develop that mentality of prior to the sin of knowledge of good and bad, which we may discuss a little bit later. Just let's finish this idea because it's very important. Try and hold on to that question. I mean, if you think about a lot of the things that's going on today in the world, and for the arguments behind, for example, pro-choice that the Torah prohibits, what do you call it? No. Abortion, for example. The Torah, by the way, unlike other religions, permits abortion if there's a danger to life, both psychological even, emotional. Certainly if there's a physical danger to the mother. But all things being equal, the Torah prohibits it. And a person had a choice before falling pregnant. Or a person has a choice to not be so selfish, and perhaps I shouldn't use that word because, it's maybe we shouldn't judge people and call them selfish or whatever, but ultimately we have a choice, and that is to make a sacrifice for that life that exists, and it is a life that is existing within us. And therefore I don't believe that people are evil and people are sick and people are wicked for having a different view than the Torah. I don't believe that. Although there are evil people and negative people in the world, but I don't believe that. Neither do I believe that people who believe in other things other than what the Torah teaches us are bad and are evil. Or, for example, euthanasia. We believe in the sanctity of life. And the soul achieves, when a person studies Kabbalah, he understands and sees that the soul achieves wondrous things without even opening your mouth. Just simply the soul being in the body achieves unbelievable things. And despite the suffering, and despite the pain, which is not easy, and I as a rabbi see it a lot, and I shed copious tears many times on the deathbed of many people and many people who suffer, etc. But yet I know and I believe full-heartedly that the soul achieves what it needs to achieve, and it's not for us to cut a person's life short. Those who do believe in that, I don't believe that they are doing it out of any wickedness or any evil. It's not easy, and maybe that's, sometimes it's portrayed as, it's a strain on the family, and why do this to the family, why expose this to the family when the person, the loved one is, suffering, and etc., etc., and all of the arguments. But whichever way you cut it, I don't believe in any way that these people are evil. I just simply believe that good and bad has become so converged today that we lack the proper clarity to see good for its own goodness sake, so to speak, or right from totally wrong. And therefore, that because there is a mixture of good within bad and bad within good, meaning to say that even within something that the Torah deems bad or negative or wrong, we've got that convergence of good, or at least the reason behind it, the ideas behind it, whatever the case may be. And that becomes very difficult. This is a difficult set of scenarios to overcome, because things are not so clear anymore. But we become bipolar, spiritually bipolar. And knowing that the Torah is truth, and truth endures, so we must turn to Hashem, the Almighty God, who created heaven and earth, for what is truly good and what is truly not good. And not be reliant upon our limited ability to be able to recognize and decide and discern what is truly good and what is not. For it is subjective. So let us just continue now a little bit further. I just want to finish this idea. Through this caused a blemish in all aspects of creation, to the degree that it became much more difficult now for the inherently to utilize or tap into our inherent power of good over bad, because we become subjective, bipolar. And that now we can understand now how few moments, years or generations after the creation itself, people erred to such a degree, to such a powerful degree, became so corrupt, even turned their back on the Creator himself. Again, starting with a good reason. Oh, God is too abstract. He's unlimited. Surely the unlimited God is not interested in little worms and ants and maggots like us. Again, there is the convergence of, and again, it's possible to say, I wasn't there, but I know within my own life and within others, it's possible to say that since we have already decided the outcome, so we create the philosophy around the outcome, and that is that this is what I want. Subjectively, this is what I want to do. It's how I want to lead my life. And it's simpler if I come to the conclusion, rationally, intellectually, with good reasoning and good rationale behind it, that God is too abstract. So God, you keep to your corner. You do what you want. I'm far from me to tell you how and what to do. And I'll keep to my corner. And I'll do what I want to do and I like to do, because surely you're not interested in me and my little life concerns you and interests you. That I do good, or I do bad, or I give charity, or I don't give charity, or I live a chaste life or not a chaste life, or a moral life. It's way beyond it. So I've explained that away. And so on and so forth. This spiritual bipolar, without the Torah, we're bound to err. For true definition of good. And thus we have to come to the Creator to help us along and give us the Torah and tell us definitively, this is good, this is bad, etc., etc. And even where bad has good reason behind it. Good thinking, good logic behind it. Yes, there's a point, person suffering. It's going to change the mother's life forever, or whatever other arguments and etc. that we may use. Nonetheless, despite all of this, and despite that potential, God saw that everything that He had made, it is exceedingly good. Because ultimately, the world will come to its rectification and completion. אולם כל זה אינו סותר את עצם תכלית הבריאה, שהיא טוב מאוד. All of this does not contradict the fact that the world is inherently good and has a purpose, and it's part and parcel of why God wanted this world that has the potential to be corrupt. And therefore, from the perspective of Hashem, be'etzem tov, ve'ena mitbatelet, the world intrinsically has good in it. And the good never is diminished. Because you can ask yourself a question, hang on, okay, so I do good and I do bad. Is it possible that my bad cancels out my good? Never. Why? Because I don't desire bad. I regret bad. I always desire good. Very few regret helping someone. Someone fell on the street, you picked them up. You regret that? But in the, when you were playing, when you were kids and, or whatever, and you pushed someone, you regret it. Not today, tomorrow, you regret it, Pushed him, I tripped him, and I scored the goal. I regret it. You're not proud of that. But you're proud of the fact that you saved someone's life. You ran across the road and you pushed an elderly lady across because a truck was coming. And your foot was hit along the way and you had to go to hospital and you were in pain for 3.5 weeks. And you fractured the thing and you were walking on crutches. You don't regret that because good never disappears. It endures forever. Bad, with one small moment of regret, is wiped off. Doesn't endure forever, bad. Because we're not bad, we're good. We make bad choices. We justify things. But we know, deep down. And therefore the world will come to its tikkun, to its completion. I want to go a little bit back. Didn't realize to what extent, because there's a beautiful essay and it continues. I just want to go back a little bit and speak about man and Eve and the perception, how it changed, and then we'll take Sam's question and we'll finish the shiur for today. But I just want to say as follows. In Moreh Nevuchim, the guide to the perplexed, a Hacham, a wise man, asked Maimonides, Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. My great-grandfather's name was Maimon. It's a nice name. Maimon. He asked of him, how is it possible that it says that when man and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and their eyes were opened and they knew that they were naked. Did they not know that they were naked before? And if there was a dimension of knowledge that they now perceived, how is it possible that sin itself, that the tree of knowledge of good and bad, their error and their sin enhanced and added to their knowledge? How is that possible? To the extent that it says, "Vatipakachna eneshneim," their eyes were opened. And Maimonides answers a very interesting thing, but I would like to also say to you, quote to you a Zohar. And the Zohar says, it's a different perception. It's a different knowledge. It's a negative knowledge. It's not a positive knowledge. It's a negative awareness. The Zohar says that their eyes were open to the heavens beforehand and were closed to the material world. The material world had no attraction to them whatsoever, didn't lure them whatsoever. It wasn't so, oh, I like that, that's so nice. That's a really nice pair of pink Nikes you're wearing. They weren't interested, not in Nike, not in Adidas, not in fluorescent pink or fluorescent orange. It didn't attract them. They were flying in the heavens. They saw spiritual things. They weren't interested. I think I told you this once, but when I was a kid, so my father gave me 4 lira. At that time it was a nice amount of money, and it was my pocket money. So I wanted to feel like a millionaire. So I went and I changed it to 400 agurot, 401 cent. Now in those days you have to understand that for 5 cents, 5 agurot, in Israel, you can buy krembo. I loved krembo when I was a kid. That's it's a lot of krembo. So 4 cents, 5 cents meant something. With 2 cents, you could buy a couple of lollies, a couple of snakes. So you could do something. So I felt like a millionaire walking around with a bag. And then the bag fell. What a disaster. The bottom fell, and I had to collect it. Went under the cupboard. Oh, what a disaster. But anyway, a child, when you're an adult, you don't collect cents. You're collecting the dollars, the tens, the hundreds. That's what you're looking for. A child sees little things. When you're flying in the heavens, when you see what's going on in the heavens, and you know what's going on when we say a good word, or you do a good action, and you see what connectivity happens in the heavens, like the Kabbalists teach us that the tikkunim and the yihudim, the unifications and the rectifications of all worlds we do when we put on tefillin or do something good, it is immense. Who is interested in Nike? Who is interested in a donut? And all of a sudden, when they ate in the tree of knowledge of good and bad, their eyes towards the heaven closed, but their eyes to the physical material world opened. And all of a sudden, they had impulses and feelings, and this attracted them, and this didn't attract them. They didn't like this, they like this, they like that. All of a sudden, they had a totally different perception. That's not the good perception. That's a negative perception. And all of a sudden, things became so much more difficult. And predominantly because their eyes to heavenly spiritual things were closed, and their eyes to the material world open, to the extent that they lost their sensitivity and their feeling towards spiritual things. And they developed a feeling towards physical things, senses, feel, touch, attraction to material things. And all of a sudden, and they knew that they were naked and they were ashamed to stand before the Creator of heaven and earth, when they now had a totally different perception of the material world, of the passions and lust of the material world, and they lost their spiritual senses. They were ashamed. And therefore, says Maimonides, their knowledge that they gained was a bad knowledge, was a descent from their spiritual knowledge. Our objective is to overcome this and develop spiritual senses and overcome our 5 senses of touch, feel, sight, smell, and hearing, and develop it to more of a spiritual one, where we do something spiritual, where we put on tefillin, when we pray, when we do something special, we actually feel. We feel the spirituality. We will continue next week. It's very riveting and it's very interesting. I will continue next week. Sam had a question.